It started as just another late afternoon in the art room, quiet, still, and smelling like paint thinner and wet clay. My art teacher, Mrs. Douglas, had gone home early, trusting me to clean up the brushes and wipe down the tables before locking up. I'd been doing it for weeks, partly for extra credit, partly because I liked the silence. There was something comforting about the empty school after everyone else had gone home. The air always felt different, still heavy, like the whole building was holding its breath. That night, the sun had already dipped below the football field lights by the time I finished rinsing out the last paint jar. The fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, flickering slightly, casting everything in that pale green light that made the world feel drained. I remember glancing at the clock, 6:42 p.m., and thinking I should probably hurry before the night janitor locked up. The janitor's name was Mr. Latham. He was an older man with a white beard and a limp that made his left foot drag just a little when he walked. I never talked to him much, but I'd see him pushing his mop cart down the main hallway every evening around 7. He never smiled, never made small talk, just nodded once, polite but distant. That night, though, I didn't see him. I packed up my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped into the hallway. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, a long echo rolling through the empty corridor. My sneakers squeaked against the tile, each step bouncing off the lockers and vanishing into the distance. Halfway to the front doors, I saw movement at the far end of the hall. A figure hunched over, pushing something heavy. I squinted. It was Mr. Latham mopping the floor near the trophy case. His gray overalls glistened under the flickering lights, and his old metal mop bucket rattled every few seconds as he worked the same spot over and over. It struck me as odd. He wasn't using any water. The mop head was dry. He just kept dragging it across the floor in slow, rhythmic motions. "Evening, Mr. Latham," I called out, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond, didn't even look up, just kept moving that mop back and forth over the same patch of floor. I hesitated for a second, then shrugged it off. Maybe he didn't hear me. Maybe he was just one of those people who didn't talk much. I kept walking toward the exit, my footsteps echoing behind me. When I reached the glass doors at the end of the hall, I pushed on them, and they didn't move. Locked. I frowned, tried the second door. Same thing. I looked through the glass, expecting to see the janitor outside, but the parking lot was empty. My mom's car wasn't there yet either. I turned around, ready to head toward the back exit, and that's when I noticed something strange. The hallway lights at the far end, where Mr. Latham had been, were flickering off one by one. The darkness started swallowing the corridor section by section, creeping closer. "Mr. Latham?" I called out again, my voice bouncing off the lockers. No answer. Then I heard it. The faint squeak of rubber soles, followed by the slow, wet drag of the mop. Only now, it didn't sound like it was coming from the end of the hall. It sounded closer. I froze. My heart started to thump against my ribs. "Hello?" I said, softer this time. Nothing. The lights buzzed again, then steadied. The hall was empty. But that sound, the dragging, scraping, squeaking, was still there, now echoing from just around the corner by the art room. Something deep in my chest told me to go back inside. I didn't even think about it. I just turned and ran to the art room door, yanked it open and slipped inside, shutting it quietly behind me. The room was dark now, only the pale glow of the hallway light seeping through the narrow window in the door. I crouched beside one of the work tables, my breath shallow, listening. The sound grew louder. Squeak, drag, squeak, drag. It stopped right outside the door. Through the small window, I saw the reflection of wet tile gleaming under the flicker of the hallway light. A shadow passed across the crack in the glass. Someone tall, standing still. The light above the door buzzed, flickered twice, then went out completely. For a moment, everything was black. I couldn't see a thing. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. Through the tiny window, Mr. Latham's outline standing directly in front of the door. His head was bowed, his shoulders slumped. In one hand, he held the mop upright, water dripping from its head, splattering onto the floor. But the thing that froze me, the thing I'll never forget, was the puddle beneath him. It wasn't water. It was dark, too dark. Even under the dim glow from the emergency exit light, it looked thick, almost oily. He turned his head slightly toward the window, and for the first time, I saw his face. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, they weren't looking at me. They were staring straight through me, unfocused, like he wasn't really there. I didn't breathe, didn't move. After what felt like forever, he turned away and started walking down the hall again, his limp dragging behind him, mop scraping the tiles. I stayed hidden for maybe 10 minutes before finally gathering the nerve to peek through the window. The hall was empty. The lights were steady again. When I stepped out, the floor where he'd been standing was wet, but not with water. It was sticky. Dark stains led down the hallway toward the boiler room. I followed them without thinking. At the end of the hall, near the basement door, the stains stopped. I gripped the handle. It was cold, damp. The metal left a residue on my palm. The door creaked open, revealing a stairwell that smelled of rust and mold. I could hear it again, that slow, deliberate mop drag echoing somewhere below. "Mr. Latham?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. Silence. Then faintly a reply. "Almost done." I froze. The voice was hoarse, broken like it was coming through water. I took one cautious step down. The concrete was slick. My shoes squeaked softly. Another step, then another. The sound grew louder, closer. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway stretched out toward the old boiler room, its door half open, light flickering from within. I crept closer until I could see inside. The room was empty except for a mop and bucket in the corner. Steam hissed from a broken pipe, curling into the air like smoke. On the far wall, black scorch marks spread upward, twisted and warped, as if something had exploded there years ago. And right in the middle of the floor was a stain. A huge, dark burn that shimmered wetly, though the rest of the room was bone dry. I knelt closer and realized it wasn't water. It was thick and red. I stumbled back, gagging. My hand brushed the wall, and something fell from above, a piece of metal, old and charred. On it was a faded label, "Maintenance, Latham." That's when the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. The room filled with that same dragging sound again, only now it circled me. I turned in every direction, but there was nothing, just the sound, growing faster, wetter, closer. Then the light blew out. I saw him, for a split second, illuminated by the dying flicker of the bulb. He was right there, face inches from mine, skin split and burned, eyes milky white. His lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. And before I could react, he was gone. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the hallway outside the boiler room. It was morning. The janitor's cart was gone, and the floors were spotless, except for one faint, wet streak leading to the exit. The principal said the boiler room had been locked for years, ever since the accident. I didn't tell them what I saw. I just nodded, gathered my things, and went home. A week later, I looked up the story myself. Turns out Mr. Latham had died right there in that boiler room. The explosion trapped him inside, and they didn't find his body until the next day. They said the heat was so intense, it melted part of the tile floor. That patch, right where I saw him mopping, had been replaced. But even now, if you go down that hallway after dark, you can still see the faint outline of a wet footprint leading to the boiler door. And sometimes, when the janitor cart squeaks at night, you can hear the sound of that mop again. Slow, steady, back and forth, like he's still down there, trying to clean something that won't ever come off. When I was 14, my school was already over 60 years old. It sat on the edge of town, a low red brick building that creaked in the wind and smelled like wet paper after every rain. The walls seemed to breathe when it was quiet, expanding and settling like something alive beneath the paint. People said it had been built on the foundation of an older high school that burned down in the late 1950s, but no one ever confirmed it. Most of the teachers had been there for decades, and they just shrugged whenever the subject came up. "Old buildings hold old air," my history teacher liked to say. "Sometimes it breathes back." That's where the legend of Room 104 came from. I first heard about it during freshman orientation. We were sitting in the cafeteria, waiting for the bus schedule, when a senior leaned over and said, "Don't take the east stairwell after dark. That's where 104 shows up." Everyone laughed, but he didn't. "I'm serious," he added. "You'll know it when you see it. Just don't open the door." At first, I thought it was just another school ghost story, like the one about the boy who jumped off the gym balcony, or the janitor who still mops the basement. But the way he said it, like he'd seen it himself, made it different. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I even asked around a bit. Most people brushed it off, but a few kids got quiet when I mentioned it. They said the same thing. It only appears near the east stairwell, after 7 p.m., and if you go inside, you don't always come out the same way. It became a kind of obsession. Every day when classes ended, I'd linger a little longer near the east hall. The floor there slanted slightly, like the ground had shifted beneath it years ago. The lights always flickered, even after maintenance replaced the bulbs. There was this faint smell of damp stone, stronger on rainy days, like the earth below was still wet from something that happened long before any of us were born. Weeks went by, and I saw nothing. Then, one Thursday in late October, I stayed after school for yearbook club. Everyone else left when the rain started, but my mom texted that she'd be late, so I decided to wait inside. By the time the halls cleared out, the rain was coming down in sheets. The sound of it hitting the roof made the building feel hollow. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, flickering every few seconds. I slung my backpack over my shoulder and headed toward the main exit, cutting through the east corridor out of habit. That's when I saw it. Between the water fountain and the old janitor's closet, a door. It wasn't there before. I knew that hallway like the back of my hand. There were just lockers along that wall, old and dented. But now, wedged between them, was a wooden door. Its surface looked warped, swollen slightly from moisture, the brass handle tarnished green. Above it, nailed crookedly to the frame, were brass numbers, 104. I don't know why I didn't just walk away. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way the air suddenly felt still, like the whole building was holding its breath. I reached out and touched the handle. It was freezing. When I turned it, the latch clicked softly, and the door opened inward. The smell hit me first. Dust, mold, and something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. The air inside was heavy, untouched for years. I stepped in slowly, my shoes crunching over what sounded like broken chalk. Rows of desks filled the room, each coated in a fine gray film. The chalkboard stretched across the far wall, a faint equation still visible, half erased, the numbers smudged into ghostly streaks. A single backpack sat in the center aisle, faded blue, the fabric torn open at the seam. I whispered a quiet, "Hello," though I don't know why. The door shut behind me with a soft thud. I turned immediately. The knob was gone, just smooth wood, like it had never been there at all. My throat went dry. I pressed my palms against the surface, solid, cold. The lights inside flickered, not the harsh school lights, but a pale, soft glow that seemed to come from nowhere. I turned back toward the desks, and that's when I realized something was off. The air had changed, heavier, and there were shapes in the room that hadn't been there before. At first I thought it was shadows, tricks of the dim light, but then one of them moved. They were figures, faint gray silhouettes sitting at the desks. Dozens of them. Their heads all faced the chalkboard, their hands resting neatly on the surfaces in front of them. None of them moved. None breathed, but I could feel them watching me, even though not one had turned around. "Hello?" I said again, quieter this time. Nothing. The hum of the room grew louder, a low vibration that seemed to come from the walls. My eyes darted to the chalkboard. The faint writing began to shift, as though invisible hands were pressing against it from behind. The chalk scraped against the board on its own, forming new words, jagged and uneven. "Stay." My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I took a step back. Something brushed past my ankle. I jumped and looked down. The backpack that had been in the aisle was now at my feet, unzipped. Inside was a binder, its pages yellowed and curled from moisture. I pulled one free, careful not to tear it. The paper trembled in my hands. It was a class attendance sheet, dated 1976. Every name was crossed out except for one. Eleanor Warren. The whisper started then, soft at first, like a distant wind slipping through cracks in the wall. Then clearer, layered, voices overlapping. I spun around. The figures were moving now, slowly turning toward me. Their faces were pale, featureless, just faint impressions where eyes and mouths should have been. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall. "Please," I said, voice shaking. "I just want to go." The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then, from somewhere in the room, a single voice spoke, high, trembling, and very real. "You shouldn't be here." I couldn't tell where it came from. It sounded like a girl, young but distant, like she was speaking from inside a well. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the room, but every desk was empty now. The gray shapes had vanished. I bolted for the wall where the door had been and slammed my hands against it. "Let me out!" I shouted. My voice came back to me flat, dull, like the room absorbed it. The chalk began moving again. This time it spelled a name, Eleanor, then beneath it, "Find me." There was a sudden pop, a sound like static cracking through old speakers, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the tile floor outside the east hallway. My clothes were damp, my hands streaked with dust. The morning sunlight was pouring through the windows. A teacher found me and rushed me to the nurse's office. She said they'd found me collapsed by the lockers, half conscious. I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. When I told her about the door, she frowned. "That's not possible," she said. "That section's been sealed off for years." I didn't believe her until she took me there herself. The hallway ended in a brick wall. No door, no water fountain, no lockers, just smooth, unbroken brick. The school's maintenance supervisor swore that whole section had been rebuilt after a gas leak back in the 80s. But when I asked if anyone had been hurt, he just said, "Not officially." That night, I searched the local archives online. There was no record of a gas leak, but I did find a newspaper clipping from 1977 about a student named Eleanor Warren. She'd vanished during school hours, last seen heading toward the East Wing to retrieve a forgotten notebook. Her body was never found. The next morning, I went back to school early before anyone else arrived. I walked straight to the East Corridor. The wall was still there, blank and cold, but the air was damp, like the smell of rain after a storm. I pressed my hand against the brick. For a second, I thought I felt something. Vibration, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I leaned closer, and that's when I heard it. The scrape of a chair, the faint rustle of paper, a girl's voice humming, almost too low to notice. I whispered, "Eleanor?" The humming stopped. Then right against the wall, so close it felt like she was on the other side of it, came a whisper so faint I barely caught it. "Don't forget me." I stepped back, heart hammering. The hallway was silent again. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Just a faint outline in the paint, the shape of a door, and at the center, carved faintly into the surface, were 3 numbers. 104. I blinked, and it was gone. Still, sometimes when the rain hits the roof just right and the halls grow quiet after hours, I can hear that soft humming again, drifting from the east wall. And I swear, if you listen long enough, you can hear the scrape of desks moving too. Like classes started again. Writing, I still remember the first time I stepped inside the old auditorium. Even after all the renovations they'd done around the school, that place looked untouched, like it had been waiting behind locked doors for years. The air had that damp, heavy smell of burned wood and rain-soaked plaster, and the echo of our footsteps seemed to travel longer than it should have. They told us we'd be rehearsing there for a few weeks while the main theater was being repainted. None of us said it out loud, but we all knew what had happened there. It was the place where the choir died. Back in the 1980s, the school's choir had been the pride of the county. People said they could make an entire auditorium fall silent with just the first note. Then one winter night, during a storm, an electrical fire broke out during rehearsal. The doors jammed, and by the time firefighters got inside, everyone was gone. They said the flames had melted parts of the ceiling, fused the piano keys together. For years, nobody set foot in there. But time passes and people forget. When our drama director, Mr. Hammond, told us we'd be using it for rehearsals, I thought he was joking. "They fixed it up," he said with a shrug. "It's just a room." He was wrong. The first day, the lights barely worked. Half the bulbs flickered like they were struggling to remember how to shine. The stage curtain was still there, burned and tattered, and when the wind came through the cracks in the old windows, it swayed just enough to make it seem like someone was standing behind it. We joked about ghosts, tried to laugh off the unease, but nobody ever wanted to be in there alone. By the third rehearsal, something started to feel off. The temperature would drop suddenly, like someone had opened a freezer. The smell of smoke would drift in, faint but sharp. Once, when I was standing on stage running lines, I thought I heard a soft note, like someone humming a low C, deep and steady. It stopped the moment I turned toward the wings. "Did you hear that?" I asked, but everyone else just shook their heads. The next night, it happened again, only louder. We were practicing a scene from our town. It was quiet, the kind of silence where you can hear the rain tapping against the roof. The power flickered once, twice, and then the hum came again, longer this time, more layered. A harmony, faint but rising. Everyone stopped mid-line. It was coming from the back of the stage. Mr. Hammond frowned, snapping his fingers for attention. "All right, which one of you is messing with the soundboard?" But the sound wasn't coming from the speakers. It was in the air, like a breath, like something living. A soft hymn, old and slow. My grandmother used to hum it when she thought nobody was listening. The lights buzzed overhead. One of the curtains shifted again, though there was no wind this time. I remember stepping closer, drawn to the sound, and I saw it. The faintest silhouettes, just beyond the stage lights. They weren't moving, rows of them, still upright, faces pale against the dark, and they were singing. It didn't sound human, not in a monstrous way, but in a too perfect way, like voices recorded and layered over and over, until they lost the tremble of life. "Stop the music," Mr. Hammond shouted, though there was no music to stop. The lights went out. Someone screamed. A chair clattered to the floor. When the emergency lights flickered on, the silhouettes were gone, but something else lingered, an acrid smell, half smoke, half iron, the sound of dripping from the ceiling. We tried to laugh it off again, though none of us managed it this time. Mr. Hammond called maintenance, said the wiring was old and dangerous. The janitor just nodded and said the auditorium should have stayed closed. The next night, nobody wanted to go back. But rehearsal was mandatory. This time we brought lanterns and stayed in a group. It went fine for a while, no sounds, no shadows, until around 8:30, when the temperature dropped again. You could see your breath in the air. That same hum began, faint and sorrowful. This time I swear I felt it, vibrating through the floorboards. The notes crawled up through my shoes into my chest. It wasn't just one voice anymore. There were dozens. One of the girls, Emily, began to cry. She said she could hear her name in the song. I told her she was imagining it, but truthfully, I thought I heard mine too. Mr. Hammond clapped his hands, trying to get our attention. "All right, we're done here. Everyone out." We started for the doors, but they didn't move. The handles were cold and locked. That's when the main curtain began to rise on its own. Behind it was the stage, blackened, warped, and standing on it, the faint shimmer of figures. The old choir, or what was left of them. Their faces were wrong, melted in places, their mouths stretched open mid-song. Smoke drifted from their clothes like the fire had never gone out. They sang, but the sound wasn't just in the room, it was in us. The melody pushed against my chest, filling every breath until I thought I'd choke on it. Someone grabbed my arm. It was Emily, and she pulled me down behind the front row of seats. I remember her whispering, "Don't look, don't look." But curiosity is a cruel thing. I peeked. They were stepping forward one by one, their feet making no sound. The closer they came, the stronger the smell of burned cloth and ozone. One boy's eyes were completely gone, just two hollow burns, but his mouth kept moving, singing with perfect pitch. The lights blew out again, every bulb shattering in a wave across the ceiling. When the emergency lights flickered back on, the stage was empty. The doors opened by themselves. Nobody said a word as we left. We didn't even stop to grab our bags. The next morning, the auditorium was padlocked again. They said the power system had shorted, that we weren't supposed to have been in there at all. They even brought in men from the district to inspect structural damage, but the way they sealed it, heavy chains, nailed boards. It looked more like they were trying to bury something. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening around school. One of the stage lights from the auditorium ended up on the football field. Nobody knew who moved it. Students said they could hear humming in the halls after hours, a soft note echoing through the vents. Then Emily stopped coming to school. Her mom said she wouldn't sleep, that she kept hearing singing through the walls of her house. Sometimes when I walk past the old building, I stop and listen. If it's cold enough, if the wind hits just right, I can still hear it, the faint harmony of voices, rising and falling somewhere deep inside. It's not loud, not even distinct anymore, but you can tell it's the same song, the same hymn. And when it plays long enough, you start to think you can make out words. Names maybe, mine among them. I think that's why they never tore it down. Maybe some things aren't meant to be fixed. Maybe the choir never stopped singing. They're just waiting for the next verse to begin.